Jeff knows that's hard for me.
That is hard, yeah.
Okay, it should be recording.
Okay, you just give Jenna and I the go-ahead whenever you want us to start. So looks like we're getting pretty close to 1, although I don't know if you start right on or give some others time to join.
We can start just a little after 1.
Yeah, maybe once people get on and all the joining sound kind of breaks up.
I was gonna say they're joining pretty quickly right now.
Yeah.
We've been getting a good response on these so far, so it's good to see.
Good.
There's 88 looking like right now.
Excellent.
We had over 270 register, so.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Wow.
This is a popular topic then.
Got another 180 to go, don't we?
We can only jump on so fast.
Right.
Well, Zoom capacity is what, 300 unless you get a special special permission or whatever. So
High capacity room.
Is the check-in number 8675309 because somebody liked that song? Just a quick question.
I hadn't even caught that.
I didn't either. Now I gotta go look.
oh, that's funny.
Oh, it is. I see it now.
I hope we didn't max out at 100 because it went to 100 and quit.
Well, the recording will be available for folks if ends up being the case, I guess.
Yeah, I think you can go ahead and start. Seems like it kind of plateaued right now.
Okay,
All right.
we can do that. So thank you for joining us today. This is Jenna Hoyt and myself, Jeff Dick from Ohio State University with a topic on club management. And I'm a 4-H field specialist here in Ohio that work with all of our clubs across the state. And with me is Jenna. I'll let her introduce herself.
Yeah, and I'm Jenna Hoyt. I've been with Ohio State Extension for 9 years, and I work in Ashtabula County as the Extension Educator for 4-H. And Ashtabula County is in the far northeast corner of Ohio. We kind of hug Lake Erie in between Cleveland and Erie, Pennsylvania. So I have a diverse program here in the northeast corner. So.
And Jenna and I kind of teamed up on this. I was working with training some brand new 4-H educators, and at the time Jenna probably had 4 or 5 years into the program as a county professional, and we kind of tapped Jenna and said, okay, what do we miss and what more information do we need to add to this? And so since then, Jenna and I have just joined forces in this topic to teach this across our state to both new professionals as well as those that are well tenured.
So hopefully we'll be able to bring you kind of a state perspective from OSU, but then also a county level perspective of some of the things and the ways to implement some of these criteria and expectations that are had for club management with paperwork and managing files, and whether that's digital or hard copy files. So we'll go ahead and get started. If you do have questions at any time, feel free to put them in the chat, and both Jeff and MJ are going to be watching the chat, so we'll try to answer your questions in a timely way as we move through. So here's kind of some of the things we're going to touch on today. When we're looking at our club files, there's 2 main points that we think are really important, and that's having what we would call your active file and your permanent file. So things in your active file are things that are going to change probably on an annual basis. This is going to be very fluid. So in this section, we would be looking at things like the volunteer lists or re-enrollment forms. So whether you have hard copy forms or if you have digital forms, if you're using 4-H online, looking at that volunteer list, printing out that report and having that in, I always recommend to my clubs, a 3-ring notebook. And similarly for us in the county offices as well, having that active file list of volunteers so we know who our go-to people are and then who's covered by our insurance and so forth. So that re-enrollment list, of course, any copies of those enrollment forms, change forms, the standards of behavior, I do require in my county program that I have assigned standards of behavior, a hard copy every year from my 4-H volunteers. I know in some programs they allow a digital copy of that. I do look for a hard copy for those sticky situations that we might get in. And then any, of course, changes to their experience or changes to their locations and so forth. And then also with that, a club roster for all of our clubs. And I keep these in a notebook, which I actually have here working from home with me. And then I move them throughout the year. And we'll talk more about that in a little bit and how those are stored. So that's kind of our active file. In the permanent file, you can see the things that we're looking for, and I'll kind of touch on those here on separate slides as well. But in Ohio, we are looking for a charter, and I'll show you what that looks like, a constitution, bylaws, the yearly financial summary, an inventory list, the tax exempt authorization form, the proof of the 990 filing, and then a copy of that IRS determination letter. So these are all things that don't change, right? These are all things that would carry over. So we would put them in a permanent file. And we encourage our volunteers to do exactly the same thing. So in Ohio, we require all of our clubs to be chartered annually. So this is what that looks like for us. There's a charter checklist of criteria that needs to be gone through. In my county program, I have this due on March 1st. My enrollment deadline is March 15th. So this needs to come in advance of that. And here's kind of a snapshot of what some of those things look like on that charter checklist. So are all of the volunteers, have they been through the screening process? Are they approved volunteers with OSU Extension? We require that every club have at least 5 youth from 3 different families. What is the name of their club? Of course, is it approved through the county extension office or the state office? Do they guarantee they're going to have a minimum of 6 regular club meetings? And this has been something that this year has been a big question for our clubs, of course, with the dynamic situation that we currently are in. They asked, well, how are we going to meet this requirement? And we've reminded them you can meet virtually. You can meet through Zoom or Google Hangout and still get those meetings in. And this is for the calendar year. So they're meeting now virtually, but then, you know, later in the season or even in the fall, they can meet face-to-face, hopefully, right? And meet that requirement. But our minimum requirement is that they have 6 regular meetings. They need to have an updated and current constitution, of course, youth officers, and agree to provide a welcoming and safe environment, promote the 4-H name and emblem, all of those things that we look for. So I saw a couple things pop up in the chat there. Are we all right, Jeff? Oh, you're muted still, Jeff.
Yeah. All right. Yes, we're fine. Just Taylor had suggested that we supply a copy of that, as you had mentioned, possible. So.
Absolutely, yeah. And we'll tell you where all these things are located too. They're all on our website that's open for our clubs to get, and therefore for our colleagues to look at also. We can definitely do that.
And then Abby had asked, and this may be a question for you, MJ, is will a PDF or slideshow be sent out after we're concluded? And I'm deferring to you.
Yeah, if you all can send me or JJ a copy, JJ can upload it to the NAE 4HA website.
Absolutely, we will do that.
And any other documents you have with this presentation.
Okay.
Perfect. All right, so back on track here. The club constitution with Ohio 4-H, all of our clubs are expected to have a club constitution that looks like this document here. It's a standard document. There cannot be any changes to the club constitution. And that we can share that example as well. So simply they can just put the name of their club once it is approved by the county office, the county in which it's organized in, and then it really is just pretty standard and walks through what it means to be a 501c3, provide a welcoming and safe environment for all of our youth, and kind of the mission and vision of our program are spelled out in that constitution. Our clubs do have the option to make changes or have their own bylaws. So you can see a template here, and that's also available. So things like that they're going to meet on a certain day, of course, or if they have any other specific rules, guidelines, expectations for fundraisers, dues, you can see some of those that are listed there. Those would be outlined in their bylaws. And we collect a copy of these when they first establish them. And then I ask of my clubs that if there's any changes, that they submit those to me on an annual basis. And that is also kind of a requirement of our program. So that way, if there was ever an issue with a family that doesn't understand something or there's a miscommunication, I can easily pull this up either electronically or in a hard copy file and have it as an easy reference for my conversation with that club, with that advisor, and with that family. So how do I track all of this? Well, I mentioned I do a lot of this electronically. This is an example of the electronic spreadsheet that I use. And then of course I also have it in a notebook here, and this spreadsheet sits in the front of my notebook. So I am very fortunate that I have an office associate and a volunteer that help in our office when files and forms come in. So they go into this notebook alphabetically, and they go right through the checklist here. So you can see, and this is a couple years old, but it really has not changed. All of my clubs and affiliates, so my committees are listed here as well with their EIN numbers, so I can sort by EIN number if I need to. And then I just go through and I mark off when I've received the forms from them. And I document any notes that I have over here, when I have reviewed their charter checklist, and if I've issued them a copy of their charter, it would go here. And then when their enrollments come in, what we've actually been doing now is highlighting with just simply out front with a pink highlighter or whatever, and going through that their forms are turned in. So this is a really great reminder for our clubs and for my staff as they are helping me. And right at my fingertips at any point, I can grab this notebook. So during the day, it sits out front with my office associate at the front desk. And then it comes back with me at the end of the day and gets secured overnight because it does have some sensitive information in there, and then it goes back out the next day. And this is what I use to review it. So we talked about the charter checklist and the constitution and bylaws, and you can see how that's tracked here. And again, I make any notes. So if I know that a club is not going to be returning for a current year, if there's disciplinary action taken against the club, for example, here you see this club was suspended, that would be noted out there. So then my office associate as well knows, hey, this club needs to talk to the 4-H educator before they hand in any forms. So after enrollments come in, so after March 15th, we've got everything processed through 4-H Online. Our club files are removed from this notebook that I talked about, and they are secured in a 3-drawer or 5-drawer file cabinet that is organized alphabetically back in my office, and that is locked. In there, it would include all those things from the active file and anything from the permanent file as well. And there's more components of the permanent file we're going to get to here in a minute. But I use this as a hard copy reference form easily at my fingertips where I can pull out forms if need be. And I generally keep 2 years of files in there. So right now I'll have 20 and 19, and I will put the other ones down into my secure storage that I need to do according to our record retention policy. And that's probably different for everybody, but I label our boxes and I label them with a destroy tag as well, and I secure them down in a locked cabinet downstairs when they come out of my office. And I encourage my volunteers to do the same thing as well, because we might need this information from them in the future too. So now Jeff's going to talk a little bit more about our EIN number, our employee identification number. Oh, Jeff, you got to unmute yourself.
Yep.
Yeah.
Thanks, Jenna. Okay. And again, my little disclaimer probably before we go into this, we realize that all states do not have their individual clubs get their own EIN numbers. In Ohio, we do ask each club and 4-H affiliate to do that. And so I'll kind of explain to you if you're in that, boat as to how we do it here in Ohio. First, we make sure that all of our new 4-H clubs and affiliates know that they must have an EIN number. We'll have sometimes that tell us, well, we're not going to handle money, and there may be extreme cases where we have some clubs or affiliates, more often affiliates, that don't have checking accounts or handle funds in any way, but we still require them to have an EIN number. Of course, they use the online SS4. There is a hard copy form, but we've found out from the IRS it's best to have them use the online version of that. That version will allow them to actually receive that EIN number within minutes. In other words, as soon as they complete the form online, it will provide them with that EIN number. We want to make sure that they do that through the club or affiliate name, not through their own personal name. We do know that the SS4 form collects the person's name plus a social security number, which sometimes scares our volunteers, but as IRS explains it, that's only done to ascertain that it's a real person requesting the EIN number for the 4-H club or 4-H affiliate. So with that, then, of course, each of our clubs and affiliates have to maintain that tax-exempt status. We have a group exemption number through Ohio, and so we send a list in on an annual basis with an Internal Revenue Service, making sure that they understand that these clubs and affiliates are attached to our group exemption number. With that, then they expect us to make certain that each of these clubs and affiliates really conduct themselves as a not-for-profit. And so with that, we have our clubs and affiliates complete a yearly financial summary. That summary really tells us generally as to what was their income for the year and what was their expenses for the year. We have them summarize that, and you'll see, I think, as we go down through here, an example of that form. But with that, there also needs to be the 990N filed. Ohio is on a calendar year, and so our year ends December 31st. And with that, according to IRS, the 5th month after the end of your fiscal year, which again, ours happens to be a calendar year, is when the 990Ns are due. And so what we've done here in Ohio is we actually ask our office staff in each of our 88 counties to submit for all of the clubs and affiliates within their county, just so that we do not have to really rely on the individual clubs and their volunteers. Some of them don't want that extra task or are just frustrated if they have trouble. We all know sometimes doing those forms with the IRS can be stressful, and so we wanted to take that off of their burden. And so our counties do that. That gives us then 88 lists that we can then draw from, versus thousands if we had to wait on each club to give us their filing results. So here's the more information about the 990N. This is the reporting instrument with the Internal Revenue Service. It says an e-postcard. It's not really a postcard. It's just an online system. It is now owned by the Internal Revenue Service. They used to farm this out to a private company that did this for them. I can tell you if you have not been on it, the new 990 And with the Internal Revenue Service is much simpler than when it was, and much better organized than what it was when it was with a private company. You can see that 4-H clubs do have a $50,000 gross annual receipts limit to file the 990N. We think that's a huge number, but I can tell you we do have a couple of 4-H committees here in Ohio because they have some large fundraisers that do have to file the long form 990 versus the 990N because they have over $50,000 gross annual receipts.
So here is kind of what that tracking looks like. I use that same spreadsheet that I developed before, and you can see the list of all of the clubs and affiliates there. And then I simply track in there if it's been accepted, if the EIN has not been found, if it's been rejected, and I make any notes that I can on the form. Jeff mentioned that we in the counties are responsible for reporting to the state office our results. And so here kind of is an example of the IRS confirmation that I take screenshots of, and then we put them into a Word document and send it on to the state 4-H office. So I print it, right, electronically to a document and save it. And then this is the status page as well that we are responsible for submitting. So it's organized, and the good ones look like this, where it says The Ohio State University. And so we know that it's fallen under the group exemption number for the state. So we print these as well and submit that document Jeff mentioned down to the state office.
Mm-hmm. And at the state office, we just collect these so that we can help counties through those that are rejected. As well as that gives us a submission ID so we can use that in reference when talking with an IRS agent about getting ones accepted that were rejected.
And we always remind our clubs at the county level that any correspondence they receive from the IRS needs to come into our office. I need a copy of that information so that I can help navigate the conversations for them. We ask them never to call the IRS directly. And that's why having the communication between our office and the state office is important, so that Jeff and our colleague Lisa can help to facilitate those conversations with the IRS. Other times we find that they end up messing things up in such a way, and then the paperwork just becomes more overwhelming for them. So we try to maintain this as best we can.
All right, any questions over the 990Ns before we move on to some insurance? And again, I should have mentioned, if you want to unmute yourself and ask questions verbally, you're certainly welcome to do that. I know some of you may be on the phone versus computer. All right, well, seeing none, we'll move ahead into insurance. This seems to be an ever-growing question in our world as we seem to hear about more suits being filed, etc., in the not-for-profit world, especially what the Boy Scouts have faced in more recent times. And so in Ohio, we actually buy or purchase $1 million worth of liability insurance for each of our volunteers. It is kind of part of our carrot to parents that want to come to club meetings and things, but don't want to become that volunteer. It's kind of our carrot to encourage them, hey, if you become a volunteer, an official 4-H volunteer with Ohio 4-H, you also then will have $1 million liability policy that will stand behind you while you're acting in the duties of your particular job description as far as the type of volunteer you're serving as. So that's one nice thing that we do for liability insurance for our volunteers. We also encourage our clubs to check into the facilities of which they're meeting to see if there's any certificate of insurance required. Ohio State does have a COI, certificate of insurance, that we can use for facilities that request this, as long as they are county planned programs, ones of which our staff are going to be present. The bad news for us right now in Ohio is that we cannot use these for clubbed planned events. And so when clubs, let's say, meet at the local conservation league or the local fire department, if they get the request that they have to have a certificate of insurance, then we must encourage those groups to either look for meeting space elsewhere or to go ahead and purchase a rider on another policy. Accident insurance certainly is something that we strongly encourage as well in Ohio. You know, facts prove that if individuals' medical bills are covered, that they're much less likely to sue for libel. So that's another reason that we encourage accident insurance. Here, we often use American Income Life. There are other options out there, but I think most of you are well acquainted with them, as they do a lot of promotion nationwide with their programming that they do for 4-H. We strongly recommend the $1 a year program to our clubs. We do have some counties that are purchasing that for all of their club members and volunteers. We have other counties that leave it up to the individual clubs to purchase it for themselves and their own volunteers. And of course, they do have that $2 a year requirement for horse clubs and ATV members, just to keep in mind. If you move on, yep, okay, Jen's already going ahead for me there. Special activity insurance, this is something you can do for special events. Either if you do not have the $1 a year program, or if you're going to have, and I'll give an example here, possibly do, let's say, a roadside pickup with your club, and you have, let's say, 4 known siblings and 12 known additional adult parents coming along, you can add those on as a special activities insurance coverage for those that were not covered under the $1 a year program. Or you can also, if you don't have the $1 a year program, of course, cover everyone, including your members, volunteers, and guests that would be coming to that event. Do you know too that the special activities insurance covers illness? The general $1 a year program does not cover illness. And so here in Ohio, if we have things where food is being served, we encourage them to have the special activities insurance. So all of our camp programs, in addition to the $1 a year program, take out this insurance just so we can cover illness should there be any, let's say, food poisoning at camp or something similar to that. We also want to make sure that, especially in things like field trips, tours, swimming parties, canoe trips, etc., that we're taking out special activities insurance.
All right, so any questions about insurance? I know one thing I do at the county level, as Jeff mentioned, I have a 4-H activity fee that I have, and so therefore I use those funds to purchase insurance for all of our members. But questions about insurance?
Well, with American Income Life, it's usually secondary to the homeowner's insurance, if I'm thinking right. Is that correct?
You are correct, Doug. So their own personal insurance is going to kick in first, and then the $1 a year program or the special activities coverage will then take care of what's out of pocket for them after that.
Other questions? Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit more about maintaining club funds and finances. So we can't emphasize enough to our club members and to our volunteers that accurate financial management is critical for our clubs and our affiliates, regardless the amount of money that they have, the amount of money that they raise, or the amount of money that they spend. It is imperative that they have a checking account for their club. So there's no more shoebox banking, keeping money right in a shoebox or an old jar and taking it from meeting to meeting. If they are collecting money or paying bills, they need to have an account set up. And we do encourage them to have a checking account for so that there's a paper trail instead of a savings account. So I've had clubs that have had savings accounts before, and it's really hard to match receipts when they take out $400 and they only spend $378.52. How do you track those things? And how we want to think the best of people, but at the same time, this is our youth's money. So we need to be transparent in how that's done. And for the same reason, we don't allow any debit card use. There needs to be a paper trail. That gives one person too much authority to spend money. So when our clubs go to the bank, they should open the account in the club's name, not in the individual's name. The address associated with it and the signers will need to be volunteers, but we also ask that there are club members that are put on the account. They will also need that IRS determination letter or possibly a charter checklist or a copy of their charter certificate or a letter from the county office or the state office to open an account as well. We do expect that all of our clubs have accounts that are 2 signatures. We recognize that not all banks enforce that policy of having 2 signers, but that is a best practice that we look for, not only for accountability, but also because it's just a good practice to have our kids practice writing checks and have them balancing books and so forth. So the treasurer and another officer or a club advisor should be the ones that are on the accounts. Of course, they be approved volunteers. If there is a club that there is only one advisor or one volunteer, then we hope that a 4-H committee member or committee council member is also on that account. And we look that the bank statements are sent to somebody that is not a check signer. That could be you as the county educator or staff member to review. It could be another family, but we want to make sure that we are being very transparent about the money that is being spent and the money that's being raised. And then the statements could be given to the treasurer to be included with the financial records. I always encourage our volunteers in their notebook that they have with them in that active section. They have a section for each club meeting each month. And maybe there's a transparent pocket folder in there where they're putting a copy of the minutes, they're putting a copy of this treasurer's report or the bank statement and any other receipts or copies of bills that they've paid, and keep those all together in case they were audited.
And Jenna, let me just add too that we know a lot of people do online banking, and the banks will add what they call a view-only. Let me see, a view-only account to where someone within that club, so it could be that other non-related volunteer, parent, etc., that would be able to have access to the online banking, but not actually take money out or put money in. In other words, they would just be a view only, as they refer to it as, and that can be kind of your double checker for online banking.
Yeah, and I would encourage you, I know I am our junior fair coordinator as well, so I serve in that capacity as that view only for those statements. And then also with my advisory committee, my horse committee, those other councils and committees that I work with, so that I can see those as well, and if need be. So a reminder to all of our clubs that all expenditures have to be approved at a meeting. And this should be done before the check is actually written, and then it needs to be documented in those club minutes. This is a struggle I find with my clubs. We have young children that are taking minutes. They're 9 or 10 years old, but we need to remind them about the importance of documenting those things. So all the approved expenditures should be put in those secretary's minutes, of course, properly motioned and seconded and voted on. And then those receipts, invoices, those need to be kept, as I mentioned, in a folder, whatever style works for people, so that it's there in case there is an audit. And all income should be documented. Carbon copy receipt books are still pretty cheap to get, and checks should be listed, and the cash, of course, is well documented in the treasurer's book. So one thing I do when I have a new club that comes in is I give them a receipt book that looks like this. Get it from the dollar store. Walmart has them. Of course, they can be bought online as well, so that they're documenting the receipts, whether that's cash, check, money order. Of course, this should be payable to the club, not to an individual, and documented. So the other thing that we really want to emphasize to our clubs is the importance of spending money for its intended purposes. As a nonprofit, we are responsible to the community, and I always remind them of that. And we are responsible to our youth. We are a youth organization, and so therefore they are the ones that get to make the decisions, and they're the ones that get to decide where the money goes. The carryover funds should really be limited, and that can depend on the club, of course. So we do encourage our clubs to have some carryover in case, for example, fundraisers that were scheduled to happen this year are unable to happen. They would have some sort of funds to help pay for project books or pay for their enrollment fees in our county or their club shirts or whatever it is that they are raising their funds for. And we do ask that each year they are audited internally. So in our Ohio 4-H Treasurer's book, there is a form at the back of the book, and that's where our audit procedures are. It asks for 2 advisors, 2 parents, and the treasurer to audit the books for the year. And then that helps them to also complete the Ohio 4-H Club and Affiliate Yearly Financial Report form, which is due January 31st. So that is reporting for the previous calendar year. And we'll show you an example here of what that looks like. And I'll let Jeff kind of touch on that a little bit.
Yeah, this is a document, and again, I referred to this earlier as kind of our responsibility with the Internal Revenue Service, that we keep financial oversight of our clubs and affiliates. So this is how we have each of those clubs and affiliates across Ohio report to their county extension offices as of January 31st for the previous calendar year. You can see from looking down through that, that gives us some very important information, because let's say a volunteer moves out of state kind of unexpectedly or something of that nature. This has the information as to where the bank account is kept, what that account number is, who are the assigners on the account, stuff that we may not normally have in our possession in the county office. But that way we know who the other signers are, so that we can go and recover that account should that person, again, be out of the area. We had one, of course, the other day that just had passed away, and so we had to pull this sheet out to find who the other signer was on the account, so that we could go in and move that account over into some new names. Additionally, we keep it pretty general. You can see, hopefully, I guess you probably can't see my cursor because it's up on Jenna's thing, but if you look at the description lines there, we keep those pretty general. So it may just be dues and the amount that it was collected. We're not going to keep track of each individual person's dues that was collected in this form. We would do that on those receipt books that Jenna showed you earlier. But we would surmise all those to show what was the total amount we collected for dues for this year, or a particular fundraiser. We do ask our clubs to identify each fundraiser separately. So if they did more than one fundraiser, it should be 2 description lines on there for the income. The same way as the descriptions down on the expenses lines, we wouldn't put each family's books on there. We would do that again on our NCR receipt form, but we would put what the total amount was that we, let's say, paid the extension office for the entire club's book on there. And again, other things that you may have as expenses, whether those be a county program fee, whether they be a club field trip, whether they be some startup monies for a fundraiser, etc., would all get included on there to give us an ending balance, which then we say, of course, must balance with what their ending bank balance is for December 31st. Many of our counties ask that that final bank statement also be included with this form. That's not something we require, but certainly makes good sense, and that way they can ascertain that these forms do balance with what their bank accounts say are in those.
Yeah,
So
the other
that's-
thing my clubs do is they will send me like an Excel spreadsheet attached to this, or their QuickBooks report as well. I have some, farmers that use QuickBooks, and so they'll just send me a printout as well. And as Jeff mentioned, they might send me that bank statement too. But what I do look for is that, of course, this beginning account balance here as of January 1st matches their balance from their previous year's statement down here. And I use this tool also to help me decide who gets a county level audit by my 4-H advisory committee each year. So if there's any concerns, or of course, if I've received a concern or complaint from a 4-H family regarding the financial management practices of a club, I will use this form to facilitate that conversation and to kind of look into a little bit more the circumstances and the documentation of things.
And they do over time give us a nice historical look as well. Again, if you have some of those concerns that maybe there's some misspending of a club, if we maybe look at the past 3 years and this fundraiser raised about this amount every year, and then for some reason suddenly this current year it only raised half that much, we can kind of go back and say, okay, that doesn't make sense. Let's talk to the volunteers and find out why that is the case, if we have maybe a parent raising that issue or something.
And this form here is the hard copy form. This form is also accepted electronically, which is beautiful. When you can get it to work, because it is an Adobe form, so some of our clubs have a challenge using that form. But that form comes in and is submitted to a secure email as a locked form. We as professionals have to go in, unlock that form, and then we can look at it. And the form actually adds right there for the volunteers. So, in the sheet there, it'll add the description, or not the description, it'll add the amount, excuse me, down, and then it'll subtract the expenses from it and give them a balance down here at the bottom. So it's a nice kind of internal audit for them as well to balance and match with their audit procedures for the end of the year and with their bank statements too. And the other thing that comes in at the same time is our 4-H club equipment inventory. So many of our shooting sports clubs or our horse clubs, but also our cattle clubs, dog clubs, even our sewing clubs, they have stuff, they have equipment, they have things that are not consumables. So we ask that they submit an equipment inventory annually for the same reason that they submit the other financial summary form. So this comes in at the same time. We're looking to see what they do have. Heaven forbid there was an insurance claim or there was an issue. We could pull out this inventory form and be able to look at it as well. So common things that are on here are, of course, our shooting sports equipments like our rifles and bows, but maybe chutes for different animal projects. Maybe there's agility equipment or jumps. All of those things should be listed on here. Maybe there's sewing machines that belong to the club. Those go on here as well.
I kind of use again, the word non-consumable items, so we're not going to keep track of, let's say, reams of construction paper that we have for putting up our booths on an annual basis. And then also the idea that if it's valued at $50 or more, and again, a non-consumable item, that they would record this on their annual equipment inventory. And this becomes really most useful when a club disbands, because then we can track as to what really belongs to the club or what may have a volunteer just loaned to the club that they're then going to take with them after the club has disbanded. It really takes out the guessing game as to what belongs to the club and what doesn't belong to the club, because over time, oftentimes we can forget what items were purchased by the club and what were possibly just loaned to the club.
And again, all of these things would go into my permanent file for my 4-H clubs. I'll keep it in my club file. I have a file folder for each club in my office, and this is something that stays in that file folder year after year so that I can easily go back and look at it. And it's under lock and key as well. All right, Jeff, you want to talk some more about use of club funds?
Yeah, we do have some restrictions, again, since we are not only a not-for-profit under the Internal Revenue Service, but also Ohio State has some probably even more stricter rules for us. And so we try to help our clubs understand there are things they can and can't do. So let's talk about memorial contributions to start out with. We really get a few of those questions on an annual basis as to, maybe so-and-so passed away in our county, and we want to do either a fundraiser for the family, or maybe we want to actually just purchase flowers for the funeral, those sorts of things. And we have to remind clubs again that the money was raised for a purpose, which is educational and or promotional of 4-H. And so there can oftentimes be questions as to, is a memorial contribution fall under those? And it probably doesn't. So what we tell clubs is in those cases, they should really pass the hat with that specific purpose, that, hey, parents can put some money in so that we can buy flowers on behalf of the club. Or if we're going to go out and, let's say, do the benefit that's listed there below, or a fundraiser for the benefit, we would have that family or a local banking institution open up a benefit fund. And 4-H could certainly advertise that, hey, we're doing this fundraiser for this benefit. But the funds would never go into the club account. Those funds would go directly into this benefit account that was held at the local banking institution, so that the monies would never be intermixed or intermingled with our 4-H funds. Club disbursements, of course, is another one. When the club disbands, how do we disperse those club funds? That can be tricky at times. We usually encourage our club volunteers to have their members that are departing vote on how they would like to disperse those. We do give them just a few options. One being that if those members are moving to other clubs, they can divide the money accordingly and send the money directly to the new club that the member will be going to. We also certainly give them the option that they can donate that to other 4-H clubs, the local 4-H endowment, 4-H camps, different things that are 4-H, and ultimately with Internal Revenue Service, we have to donate it at minimum to another 501c3 type of organization. And then equipment, the same thing. We use in Ohio kind of a general practice that equipment would revert back to the county 4-H advisory committee. Each of our counties has a 4-H advisory committee that kind of helps or advises our educator on how they would put into practice maybe some of the expectations for the county, so on and so forth. And so the equipment would revert back to that group. They could then decide, hey, is there another shooting sports club here in the county that we can give this equipment to, or are we going to put it under lock and key until we start a new club? Or is there a better option that we, sell these things and take the funds that we get from them and put it into the local 4-H endowment account, those sorts of things. The main, idea that we try to really enforce here in Ohio is that we never should be putting money into the hands of our youth. In other words, if a club folds and the member says he's going over to the other club, we're not going to say, hey, here's $10, which is your share of the remaining money that was in this club. Take it and put it into that club's treasury. We never want to do that. We want to send a check directly to that club, made out to that club, so that there's really no confusion as to the fact that the exact monies that were left in this 4-H club were put into another 4-H function or another 501c3, did not go into anyone's personal pocket. And the same with equipment. Again, we're not going to hand out the firearms, we'll use a gross example here, to the club members. When the club disbands, we're going to actually make sure that that stays with 4-H or another 501c3. So some do's and don'ts of fundraising. Again, we kind of try to advise our clubs here in Ohio of some important things with fundraising. The first one is that we say that every individual should be written a receipt each time cash or checks are submitted to the club for fundraising items. Again, the same one that Jenna talked about, giving out with dues or anything else. So it's a multi-copy receipt, so that both the parents and the club and volunteer would have copies of that. Then again, we would have a copy that we would attach to the deposit slips as deposits are made to the club account. And obviously those need to balance. If accepting checks, we want to make sure that all of those checks are written directly to the club or affiliate. Excuse me. I tell our volunteers that if another family writes a check out to them personally, they need to decline accepting that check, but rather ask that family to take the check back and rewrite it to the club in the club's name. And then the sale of non-taxable food items is greatly encouraged or preferred because of the fact that we do not want to put our clubs into the practice of having to charge tax and then report that tax and pay in the tax to the state of Ohio. In Ohio, food items are non-taxable.
Oh, Jeff, you went muted.
Yeah, I'm working from home and I had a surprise guest walk in the front door. So I don't know, I would be interested, I guess, in this as we get a lot of questions. Are there many other, I guess, states out there that use non-food items as fundraisers, and how do you deal with collecting the tax?
Do all this at home. Okay, you listening?
Up here to,
Well, Jeff, sometimes the
In the
horse and
northeastern
pony clubs will
United
have a
States,
tack
most people are
auction,
really colorful. Leaves
and a lot of times they will run the tack
Many
auction through
Americans
a
take
different
scenic fall foliage trips.
group.
In Japan, a
And,
similar
that group will do
phenomenon.
the actual buying and selling, and then kind of have a third party that way, so they're not directly involved in those items.
okay. I see Deborah put in the state of Idaho sends a form to our leaders council so that they can pay tax on the sale items for the year. So Deborah, let me clarify. Then it sounds like the leaders council has a vendor's license to where they then collect, report, and pay in the tax.
Well, they hold the barbecue at fair each year, or they have in the past at least, and the sale money from the barbecue, however much they get per ticket, they pay sales tax on that.
Okay. And so you do have a food tax, sounds like, in Idaho. Okay, we'll move on into don'ts. We don't use the money raised by a 4-H club or affiliate to support any political campaign or issue, including even a county extension levy. Here in Ohio, we've had a few counties that have had to go on to the ballot for funding, and it's been kind of a heated discussion as to why can't our 4-H clubs then support that particular levy fund, and they cannot. It's just the rules of things they can't do as a 501c3. So with that, we can only have parents who could individually donate for that type of event. We don't allow them to purchase raffle, bingo, or games of chance tickets, spending clubs to support or participate in any of these types of activities. Our Ohio State University has some very strict rules, stricter even in the state of Ohio with us as far as conducting any raffles. And so our 4-H clubs are not allowed to do that across the state, as well as not allowed to purchase, of course, raffle tickets for other entities' raffles. And I kind of touched on not spending the funds for any individual's benefit. We do know that there's oftentimes college scholarships, camp scholarships, different things like that that clubs want to do, or even county 4-H programs as a whole want to do. And so the way that we address that is that there has to be some a well-known selection plan in place to where youth from this age to this age are eligible to apply. Here's the application process. Here's the selection process. And then we can choose college scholarships or let's say a camp scholarship. But with that, then the club or county program would send the funds directly to the camp itself. I see some yellow drawing on there, Jenna.
That was not me. So somebody's
Oh,
taking
okay.
notes. There we go.
So the other thing that we deal with in relationship to tax in Ohio, of course, is our tax on 4-H publications, and what our state of Ohio sees as the policy on this is who is the end user. And so they see the 4-H member or family as the end user. And so with that, we would have to pay tax for project books. However, if the club is to pay dues or program fees to either the county extension office, to the county 4-H program, or to their club individually, they can purchase club books without a tax because they are not for profit. However, if the club collects a different amount of dues, in other words, if this member's dues is, let's say, $12 because they have 2 project books, and this member's dues are $6 because they only have 1 project book, then that is seen as not an acceptable way to avoid the taxes. So in other words, the club needs to buy all of the books for all of their members to be tax exempt, and do that with, again, funds that they have fundraised specifically for that purpose or are charging a county dues or club dues for. Another option is we do have some county 4-H advisory councils who have countywide fundraisers, and they may supply the books to all of the members in the county at no cost. And so in that case, the end user is the way it's seen by the state of Ohio is actually that 4-H council or OSU Extension, since they're the one writing the check. And then finally, we do have some counties who has maybe a business that says, hey, we're going to pay for all of the books in the county. And obviously we don't have to collect tax from our members. However, that sponsor does have to pay taxes for buying the books. Now, we do have a couple specific situations to where the sponsor is supplying, let's say they're donating much more money than what the books would cost. And so then the books are purchased out of those donation dollars, and the individual sponsor is not charged actual tax. A lot in a short bit of time. I think we had a couple questions pop up. Let's see. Are clubs able to use funds to give a scholarship to a club member if the scholarship funds are approved by the club each year? And Teresa, yes, here in Ohio, they are. And again, though, there has to be a well-established process for that. So in other words, who is eligible for the scholarship? And it needs to be in a sense, generalized. So we can't say only Johnny is eligible. We need to say that all of our 4-H club members between the age of, let's say, 9 and 13 are eligible for this particular scholarship that we're doing. And then here is the application process. Here's the selection process. And then once Johnny is selected to be the recipient of that scholarship, we would write the check directly to the 4-H camp or college, if it was a college scholarship, etc. So we're not putting the money directly into Johnny's hands, but rather paying for the event of which he prepared a scholarship application for. Good question.
Yeah, Jenna, you brought up the fact that we're getting younger members who are officers in a lot of our clubs these days. And our banks are getting a little sticky over here in Indiana about who is able to write checks and keeping up on signature cards and those kind of things. Do you actually have youth on the signature cards and having to change those every year or so? How does that
Yeah.
get handled?
Yeah, so absolutely. So I am fortunate. I have the opportunity to work with our junior fair board and then also my small animal committee. And those are both youth run. And we have a really good relationship with one of our local banks. Actually, Huntington Bank has been helpful too, but we have a local bank here that they are very good. We just have to submit to them new minutes every year, of course, and then they can update the signature card. The child typically has to have some sort of ID, so whether that's a school ID and then they need to have their social security card with them, or a driver's license and another form of ID, and then they can update the accounts. So I think part of that is the relationship that we've built with our local banking institutions, that they allow that. I have talked with many clubs where they are using a larger bank like First Merit, or even some of the Huntington branches, that they don't have that ability. So we just remind them and encourage them that the kids really need to be doing the banking at the county level, right? And they should be helping, or at the club level, and they should be helping to write those checks, and they should be helping to maintain those funds. And I still encourage them to sign the check and have the advisor sign next to it, and the banks still accept it, so they get that practice of the depositing the money and the writing of the checks.
Like, that's a really good question. And I see across the state of Ohio a huge difference from county to county as to what's acceptable. And I think the closer we get to our urban areas, the more we struggle with that, because they don't understand that well what 4-H is. We're just another not-for-profit that's showing up at their door that wants a youth to be a signer on an account, and some just flat out won't allow it. We've had some clubs tell me to where they have their members sign the memo line just as the experience of writing the check, but obviously only the adult can sign the signature line on the check. So that's just kind of one thing you have to work out with your local banks and see what their particular banking policies are, as well as what will that local manager maybe allow you to do, because they have a strong feeling for 4-H. Other questions? Well, Jenna's popping up our contact information, and that's how you can reach us via email if you have questions that you didn't want to ask in front of all, or if you have additional questions that come up later. And actually, I think we did have just another one pop up here in the
Yeah, we will,
chat.
we'll send the materials to Jim and the PowerPoint as well. And there's the recording, MJ was recording, so we'll make sure that you guys have access to the information, and you can reach out to us if you have other questions.
Thank you. I appreciate you doing this for us.
You bet. We're glad we had such a good turnout today.
Yes, thank you very much. You did awesome.
Absolutely.
And I think I had to turn over the hosting capabilities to JJ. I don't know if one of you that are still co-hosts can hit the record button or unrecord.